Hey, hello everybody. This is Dr.G.P.Sudhakar, Professor of Management from Hyderabad, India. Right. So this time I come up with interesting research. Right. It is the objective of research is to find out the top 5 factors contributing to Indian States GDP. Indian States GDP. See, because India, it consists of 28 states and 8 union territories, right? See, the GDP across the states, literacy rate, poverty rate, unemployment rate, majority of all macroeconomic indicators for each of the state. Very, it is like very diversified country, right? So, that is the reason I thought what factors really contribute to at the state level GDP of the Indian states, right? Top 5 factors. So with that objective, I started this research, right? So let's move on. I will tell you what is the methodology I followed and what is the origin of the research idea, how I got the idea, what is that I have done, what I could find out, right? So these details I will be telling you, right? So let's move on and see, this presentation consists of research problem, uh, research conceptual model, then sources of data, what sources I have used for data analysis, Indian states GDP, how across different states, how GDP share is each of the states share. Next, what is the each of the state and their ease of doing business, how diversified it is. I will show you graphs. Right. Similarly, what is the population share of each state? Right. Similarly, I will show you one table. This is the state's population share and state GDP like this. Next, research findings. What is the finding out of which? I used correlation and regression techniques, right, and percentages, in Excel sheet, right. So this is what I am planning to present you today, right. This is very findings are very much interesting, right. I will tell you what is the origin of this research. See this. See, basically, I was going through Indian data portal like data.gov.in. Right, it consists of different data tables and different visualizations. Also, they provide different visualizations. Right, different Indian states data, programs data will be there. Right, GDP you can find, literacy rate you can find, unemployment rate. Similarly, alcohol consumption percentage, tobacco consumption percentage, has sanitation levels in the country, similarly having water resources in the drinking water facilities. These kind of all macroeconomic and health related factors, having availing health scheme of the government, or at least having one in the health insurance scheme in the household. So these kind of variables, different states, how they are, these data is available on the data.gov.in website, right. See, I was going through couple of variables attracted my eye, that is, for example, Maharashtra state is there, right. It has got GDP of $450 billion, whereas its literacy rate is 82.3%. 82.3%. If you observe Kerala has got the maximum literacy rate of 94%, right? However, its GDP contribution is hardly $130 billion. $130 billion. Then I got a question: is literacy rate is not really contributing to the GDP? Because Maharashtra has got $450 billion GDP and literacy rate is hardly 82.3%, whereas Kerala has got maximum literacy rate and GDP $130 billion. That means his literacy is exactly is not contributing to GDP. That is the question I got personally to myself, right? And then another two more variables attracted my eye. What are those? One is alcohol consumption and then tobacco consumption. See, if you observe relatively, Maharashtra and Gujarat have lesser, compared with other states, lesser alcohol consumption rate and tobacco consumption rate. But these two are the number one and number three states with respect to GDP contribution to Indian GDP. Right. Number one and number three. That means I thought if you have lesser alcohol consumers and tobacco consumers, is it contributing to GDP? Is there any relationship between these two, alcohol and tobacco consumption and GDP? That means if you have more people, you will have less GDP. Is it like that? So then I got a question. What is that we can prove with respect to data points? Right. So these two further, in domestic, in any household also these discussions, traditional questions are there. What is that? What is that education really contributing? Is it contributing to GDP or not? Alcohol consumption and tobacco consumption, do they lead to poverty? Next, what is the impact of real impact of education? These are the traditional questions we got, right? So this put together, all these questions put together to me, then I thought, so what is that really contributing to Indian GDP? Right. What factors I can consider? Macroeconomic factors. And then I will show you what factors I considered. I designed a conceptual model. I identified 17 independent variables and one dependent variable, that is Indian GDP. Right. So I will show you that. See this is the conceptual model I designed. So what factors, independent variables I considered? State population, literacy rate, unemployment rate with respect to each Indian state. 28 states plus 8 union territories, total 36 rows will be there in the data table. Right. Unemployment rate, length of state highways, this is a very important factor. Per capita availability of power, how many kilowatt power per hour is available in the state, right? Invested capital, ease of doing business score of the state. Next, agricultural investments, health scheme or insurance coverage, at least one member in the family, do they have health insurance, or are they availing any government health scheme? That is also has got a relation to GDP, right? So next, what alcohol consumption percentage, tobacco usage percentage, right? Next, poverty rate. Next, poverty rate. Is it related to GDP? Having a drinking water source, having sanitation facilities, life expectancy, hmm, household size, human development index. All these factors, are they related to Indian GDP or not? I wanted to find out with the data, and using correlation technique and regression technique, we can find out the results, right? So, and also, what is the real impact of education? What is the real impact of alcohol consumption and tobacco consumption with respect to other variables? Also, we can find from this research, right? Let's move on. See this. See, these are the hypotheses. I started with null hypothesis. I assumed that there is no relationship between state population and GDP. There is no relationship between literacy rate and GDP. This is how I defined 17 null hypothesis. Right. Later on, using correlation value, if I got positive correlation, I have rejected the null hypothesis. And if negative correlation is there, I accepted the null hypothesis. This is very simple technique. Okay, let's move on. These are all the different 17 different variables, right? So what is the source of data I have considered? I have considered this data.gov.in, major data variables I got from this website, right? So they have different dashboards and tables, right? Different visualizations also they are having. So another one I used is RBI database, that is Reserve Bank of India database. For per capita power availability in the state, also GDP data. In 2019 GDP data I considered. Next, ease of doing business index of the state. So these data items I collected from the RBI publications and RBI database, right? So basically, this other site I used is the NITI Aayog reports. They have different publications on Indian programs and plans, right? And so that also I used. Next one is for HNI, that is Human Development Index. I considered the UNDP, United Nations Development Programs, HNI index of each of the Indian state. I used Wikipedia for that. This only for this variable I used the Wikipedia database, and all the data what I considered for this research is the recent 5 years data, right? GDP data specifically I consider 2019 data, right? So let's move on. I will show you how diversified is the GDP level, population, all that in using graphs, right? Let's move on. This is the data table. It consists of 36 rows and 18 columns, 17 independent variables and one dependent variable, that is the GDP. Right, it started with population, literacy rate, and independent variables. Right, all these data items I have gathered. Right, so let's move on. This is the data table further. 36 crores. Have a look at it. Okay. See the data analysis. How I have done? I used simple MS Excel. I used right correlation regression techniques. I used for finding relationship between different variables. I used correlation, and based on the correlation coefficient value, I identified the intensity of relationship. Similarly, to prove to authenticate whatever I got in correlation, to double check, I used regression. So, is that same variable having relationship with the GDP? Is it having effect also on the GDP? To find out that, I consider regression technique. Right. So, if the p-value is less than 0.05, it is proved that that variable is having the effect on the GDP. Right. So then based on correlation coefficient value, I considered what are the top 5 variables having maximum correlation coefficient value with GDP, right? So I added them in the decreasing order of correlation coefficient value, which is giving me the top 5 factors contributing to Indian GDP, right? So let's move on. And the graphs are bar graph, line graph, and the pie charts I used, right? So let's move on. See, this is the Indian GDP scenario, right? If you observe keenly, Maharashtra state has got a $450 billion GDP. Next, second position is the Tamil Nadu, $290 billion. Third is Gujarat, 260. Fourth and fifth, Karnataka and Uttar Pradesh, $250 billion. So these five states, top five states put together, if you put it, see, I have computed the GDP values I gathered, right? I have found out the entire sum of the all the states and union territories. I got $3.2 trillion GDP for 2019 for Indian GDP, $3.2 trillion. Out of $3.2 trillion, these top five states, if you put together, they are contributing almost 50% of Indian GDP. That means 50% of Indian GDP is coming from these top five states: Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, Karnataka, and Uttar Pradesh. Right. So these are the five states contributing to 50% of Indian GDP. Okay, let's move on and learn what is the each business. See, this is how diversified it is. Andhra Pradesh has got ease of doing business of 98.3 score. Next is Telangana 98.28. Just these two are competing for first position. Almost AP first and Telangana second. 0.02 is the fraction difference between each of doing business among these two states. But at the macro level, if you observe, more than 50% of the states are having Indian states more than 80 ease of doing business score. See the graph, upper edge, more than 80, so many states are there, more than 50% of the states. Other states, northeastern states probably, I think now a lot of investments are being pumped in northeastern states also, they will also pick up, right? So let's move on. This is the diversity, to show you the diversity within the country, right? So let's move on. See this. This is the population share of Indian states. Now, for example, Uttar Pradesh. Uttar Pradesh has got how much? 16.64% of population share. Huh? Population share is 16.64% population share. And Maharashtra has got 9.36% population share. Okay, so similarly, Tamil Nadu 6.6% population, right? So we will see with respect to GDP share also with their GDP share, right? See this GDP share next slide. This is GDP share. Uttar Pradesh GDP contribution 7.6% to Indian GDP. Maharashtra is contributing 13.81%. One characteristic I observed is Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, and Gujarat. They are contributing more GDP than the population share they are having. For example, Tamil Nadu has got 6% population share, and GDP population share, how much they have? They have 8.9% GDP share. GDP share 8.9%. Similarly, Gujarat, how much population? Gujarat population share is 5%, and GDP share is 7.898%. 7.98%, right? So these three states, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, and Gujarat, more lesser people are more productive, probably, contributing more to the GDP. right? GDP share, right? So let's move on. This is only learning, right? It is very interesting findings are there. Going further, see this. See this. This is better visualization table I have put. Right, population share and GDP share among all Indian states and union territories. Right. This is so just visualization purpose. You know, and also we can find out. I will tell you one more research finding is there at the end in the presentation due course. What is the relationship between population and GDP? I found that there is a strong correlation between population and GDP. Right. Interesting finding. Okay, let's move on. See this, these are the research findings. This is based on, I will show you the correlation matrix and regression matrix also after the explaining you the findings. Right, so what are the findings? See this. First, no, our main concern is about Indian GDP, right? What factors are really contributing? Strong correlation, which factors are having? See this, which factors are having strong correlation? Indian state population is one, length of state highways, whether it is a central highway or a state highway, length of the routes in the state are majorly contributing positively towards the GDP of the state. Next, invested capital in the state, whether it is industrial investment, public investment, or private investment, put together it is contributing to GDP. Next, agricultural investments, that is also contributing to the strongly correlated to the Indian state GDP. Right, these four variables are strongly correlated, means almost close to 0.75, more than 0.75 correlation coefficient value. These four variables: population, length of the state highways, agricultural investments, and invested capital. Right. Next, moderate correlated, what is that? Ease of doing business. 0.6% more close to 0.6% correlation coefficient value ease of doing business is having with the Indian state GDP. So these are the top 5 factors contributing to Indian GDP. I will show you the final table also, rank order table. Don't worry. And let us discuss the other findings. Right. What is the other finding? There is no relationship between literacy rate, unemployment rate, and Indian states GDP. I found out that literacy rate, unemployment rate, these two are not related to Indian GDP. Then what is the impact of literacy rate? That I will explain you in the next slide. Right? If it is not really contributing to GDP, what is its real impact, education impact? That I will explain you in the next slide. Right? So similarly, what is that? How to household size? The more people you have, it is negatively little bit correlated to the GDP. Right? The more people you have in the house, right? Household size. Let's move on and this. See, what is the real effect of literacy? See, it is a strong correlation. Literacy rate is strongly correlated to having sanitation in the state. It is also strongly correlated to Human Development Index, UNDP, Union Development Index, right? And literacy rate, the more literacy rate you have, the less poverty you are having. Example, first state Kerala. Kerala having literacy rate 94% and poverty rate is hardly 7%. Relatively to compare with other Indian states, 28 states, it is having very relatively less poverty rate, Kerala state. That means literacy rate is, the more literacy rate you are having, the less poverty rate you see. Right, that is the finding. Okay, but direct GDP correlation I have not found out. But literacy rate is positively correlated to having sanitation, and also it is positively correlated to Human Development Index. Right. So let's move on. Literacy rate can avoid poverty in the people and help Human Development Index. That is the reason we have to educate people. We have to educate people. Next, see what is the other finding. Weak positive relationships between having health insurance scheme for at least one person in the house, having drinking water facility, life expectancy rate, and Indian GDP. Yeah, these are also positively related to Indian GDP, but less correlation, no, less than 0.25%, less than 0.25 correlation coefficient value, but they are positively correlated, right? The longer the people live in the state, also contributing to the Indian GDP. It is 0.011%, 0.011 correlation coefficient value. Expectancy rate and GDP. That means expect people are living more is also positively related to GDP. Right. So let's move on. See what is the real impact of alcohol and consumption, tobacco consumption, alcohol consumption and tobacco consumption. See, there is no direct relationship between alcohol consumption levels, tobacco consumption levels, and Indian state GDP. There is no direct relationship. Earlier, we thought, right, when we are discussing about Maharashtra, Gujarat state, and they are having less of these two parameters and more GDP. So, is there any relationship? We thought, right? Actually, here there is no the negative correlation. I got right. And then, what is the other finding? Moderate positive correlation. Alcohol consumption is related to having a health insurance for the member in the family, or utilizing the government health scheme. That means, the more people consume alcohol, it is correlated to the more people will avail the government health scheme, government health benefit. That is, these two are correlated. That is very much correct, right? So that is the one of the finding. Next, what alcohol consumption is positively correlated to the tobacco consumption. These two are going together, right? Next, what low to average positive correlation. Alcohol consumption, tobacco consumption, these two are having lower level of correlation value with poverty, positive correlation. That means the more these two increase, the poverty level will increase. So we have to be very careful, right? So these are the findings of my research. So let's move on. The strong positive correlation, what is that we found? Agriculture investment, right? What is the impact of agriculture investment? Specifically, if we talk about, it has got a strong positive correlation with population. That means more population is there in the state. We are investing more with respect to agriculture in that state. Similarly, the more agriculture investments are going in, length of the roads are also increasing in the state. Similarly, other capital is also coming to the state because of more agriculture investments. These are positively correlated. Ease of doing business rate is also higher, if your agriculture investments are more in the state. So these are strongly correlated. Next, what ease of doing business is moderately correlated to length of state highways. The if you have more roads length in the state, ease of doing business rating is increasing. Similarly, capital coming to the state is also increasing because of ease of doing business score, capital coming, right? So next, strong positive correlation. What is that we found? Capital invested in the state is positively correlated to the length of state highways. That is very much correct, right? The more investments we are putting in the state, it is contributing to length of the state highways. So this is some of the findings, right? So let's see. This is the correlation matrix. See, if your last row is the state GDP, and these are the independent variables, I have made the bold for the positive correlation, having strong correlations, point greater than 0.75 correlation coefficient value. I have made it bold. Now, population we have got, next length of state highways, next ease of doing business, and mm, agricultural investments and capital invested in the state. These are the five variables having positive correlation. The remaining relationships also you can see, some occasionally I have made them bold, right? So other findings from this correlation matrix only I have put that research findings in, previously whatever I explained. Right. So let's this is the regression matrix. See, p-value I considered, it is less than 0.05. These factors are really contributing to the GDP. For example, population. Next, length of state highways. Other one is, ease of doing business. Agricultural investments. They are having regression coefficient with respect to p-value is less than 0.05. Okay, they are contributing to the GDP. Right. So next, what hypothesis testing. For example, positive correlation is there means I have rejected the null hypothesis, and wherever negative correlation is there, I have accepted the null hypothesis. Right. Okay. Let's move on and the other findings. See, these are the top 5 factors contributing to Indian GDP. So this he in this table I have not put in the decreasing order of correlation coefficient value, but identified that these are the next slide. I will show you rank ordered top 5 factors, no, which are contributing to the Indian GDP. See, and what are the next 5 factors? See this. This is rank ordered factors. First one is the length of state highways. Next, agricultural investments in the state. state population, invested capital in the state, ease of doing business score. These are the top 5 factors, contributing to the Indian states GDP. Okay. So next move on. See further, this research can be extended further, right? How at district level also we can do this research, or country level also we can do this research, similar research, or region level also we can do this similar research. For example, you decided to propagate this research at country level, what factors you can consider? See, I have considered 17 independent macro indicators, right? You can, in addition to these factors, you can consider like inflation rate of the country. That means if I have lesser inflation rate, is it contributing to the GDP? Or FDI. If the FDI is coming more to my country, is it contributing to the GDP? See here in this current research, I have not considered FDI because our FDI is hardly 50-60 billion dollars a year, whereas our GDP is 3.2 trillion dollars. See, percentage is how much percentage? Just see. So that is the reason FDI I have not considered, right? So next is corporate debt. It varies from country to country. So is it having the positive impact on the GDP, country GDP? And digital competitiveness index, digital competitiveness index, for example, IT and automation, is it contributing to country GDP? That also, we have so many digital programs, right? So is it really contributing to country GDP? This also, we can consider when we are doing, country level research. If you want to propagate this research to the higher level, country level, or you can do. So this is the methodology I followed. So those are the findings, top 5 factors we could find with respect to contributing to the Indian GDP. Right. So that's all from me for now. So this is interesting research. This research, it did not take much time for me. See, these are the traditional questions are there, right? Is it what is the real impact of education and alcohol consumption, tobacco consumption are they leading to poverty? See, the traditional discussions in every household it happens, right? So then I thought, is there any way I can find out with the data? Right, then I went to these websites and gathered the data, and empirically I have come to some findings, right? Thank you, that's all from me for now. Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye. All the best.